This morning we have a distinguished guest with us, Msgr. Gier. In 1971, he was sent on his first assignment to Bishop Kelley. How are you doing this morning, Msgr.?
Very well, thank you.
So, it's obviously been a while since you've worked here. What are some differences that you...
a long time ago.
What are some differences that you've seen in Bishop Kelley from then versus now?
Well, it's bigger. You have a lovely chapel. You have a much more extensive athletic facilities than we had when I was here. When I was here, if we had an all-school mass, we had it in the gym, which was a very different atmosphere than trying to have it in a chapel. So that's one of the first things I noticed. Also, another thing that I would notice immediately is that there aren't 6 Christian brothers in habits walking the halls and 6 Sisters of Divine Providence from San Antonio, Texas, walking the halls. So when I was here, there were about 13 or 14 of us that were religious of some sort, either one of the priests of the diocese or Christian brothers or Sisters of Divine Providence. Also, when I was here, and I'm sure I had nothing to do with it, but almost all those years we were state champions in wrestling and cross country. I don't know if that's still the case here. It's one of my claims to fame. I'd love to say that was all my fault, but the guys that were in those 2 programs would just laugh themselves silly if they heard me say that.
So obviously the 70s were a different time. What was the diversity of students like then?
Well, it was a very different time, because of the 5 years I was here, 4 of those years we were in Vietnam as of the Vietnam War. So that made life very, very different in any high school in the world. But as far as the diversity of students was concerned, one of the great things that Brother Bernardine Kosmiski provided for this school was a thing called the buses. And I don't know if you even remember or knew that happened. But in those days, we had probably 6 buses that would leave here every morning about 6:30 and go all over the city of Tulsa and Broken Arrow to pick up students to come to Bishop Kelley High School. Kids that didn't have rides, didn't own their own cars, all that kind of things. So we'd start on the north side and go across from St. Augustine's, St. Monica's, St. Jude's, Immaculate Conception, over to St. Catherine's and around, and then we brought in kids from St. Anne's and out in that area. This was before St. Benedict's was founded. So the diversity of students was huge because we had the busing system that brought them. And one of the most, interesting things about the busing system and why we had to stop it was the Key Club were the drivers. They were senior boys and sometimes even senior girls who drove the buses. And Brother Bernardine was the coordinator of the buses. So obviously nothing ever bad happened on the buses, because you did not want to be answerable to Brother Bernardine when you got to school in the morning. But it was really a tremendous system. It brought a lot of kids into the school that now just have no access to the place. And the reason that it had to be discontinued were actually insurance laws, because you could not insure a school bus with a driver that wasn't over 21. And so an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old high school senior could no longer drive the buses, and there was no way you could afford to pay the drivers to do that. And so the cost factor stopped it from happening. And also, when I was here, there were 3 Catholic high schools in Tulsa. There was Bishop Kelley High School, at that time Monte Cassino High School, which was an all-girls school, and at that time Cascia was an all-boys school. And so those kids were all over there, and our kids were over here. So it was a little different mix than it is at the present time.
What was it like getting students to enter vocations then versus now? Because now you can use social media to reach out to them and just...
Well, I would say it wasn't quite as successful because there weren't very many that went off to the seminary in those days. Because one of the problems was the whole sociological reality of the United States of America at that time. The whole country was in a huge cultural crisis, and it had to do with government, if you want to say, kind of collapsing before our eyes with the whole Watergate business. You had the Vietnam War, which was tremendously controversial in this country, and then kind of in addition to that, you had the whole sexual revolution. So all of those things mounting up, and then you add to that some of the confusion that was in the Roman Catholic Church by virtue of the adjustment to Vatican II. So you add all those things together, and you didn't have a whole lot of, in fact, I don't know that there are any, certainly no priestly vocations out of the time I was here at all. And there weren't any people going off to the sisters. Maybe a few went to the brothers but didn't stay and came out. So the brothers were an immensely strong influence in the school at that time.
So obviously today we're in free dress. Did free dress exist back then? And what were the uniforms like?
Absolutely not. There was no free dress. That word just wouldn't even have appeared in our vocabulary. So it was the uniform, it was the girls' skirts and those little blazers, blouses, and the guys wore long pants and shirts with collars. And their hair could not be over the collar in the back. It could be down to the collar, but not over the collar. So you had if you were a long-haired hippie at Bishop Kelley High School, your hair stopped right at the collar.
So,
and we wore the uniforms all the time. There were no such things as days that you came without your uniform on. That just didn't happen. No.
So I think there are a few people in here with some more questions for you, so we'll let them.
So do you believe rules over time have become less strict or more strict, and do you believe that was beneficial towards the school, or do you think it's less beneficial towards the school?
Well, I have no idea exactly what kind of rules you live with now, other than obviously your dress is a little freer than ours was. However, just getting in here, to be able to sit here and have this and have my little tag on me would say that things are much stricter than they were when I was here. Any priest in the diocese could have walked into this school, gone into any classroom, taught, and walked out and never even been questioned. Now I had to give blood. So I'm not sure if, from your side, if things are looser than they were in those days. But certainly from just getting here, by virtue of the safety for children today is very different than it was then. There was a lot more, I don't know, freer access to the students and things of that nature. Which doesn't probably really answer your question. But.
Was there a smoker's court here back then? Did they allow students to smoke?
You are hysterical. I won't let us say there was a smoking court. Yes. Was it legitimate? No.
Okay. All right.
The girls' bathroom was often, if you would open the door, the smoke would come out of the girls' bathroom, but it wasn't legal.
So it was not a sanctioned
It
smoking
wasn't a
court.
sanctioned smoking, but you could hardly breathe in the girls' restroom. And it was unique to the girls' restroom.
Interesting.
And I must also admit at that time, in the 70s, all the smoking wasn't tobacco.
I believe that.
Did you have a favorite athletic event you liked to go to?
Yeah, my favorite event would have been the basketball games. Although I always liked to go when we won state championships in wrestling and cross country as well. But my favorite sport would have been basketball. I understood it.
So you've mentioned what you've seen change in Bishop Kelley, but is there anything that you've seen that's stayed the same?
Well, hopefully, the overall commitment philosophically of the school has remained the same, that it is a Christian organization that is here to not only teach young men and women all of the academic subjects, but it is an organization that looks at the whole person, body, and soul, and speaks to the issues of the mind as well as the issues of the soul. And I would assume that that is still the same, because that was the primary purpose of the Catholic high school in the first place, is that we learned how God interacts with us and how we are expected to interact with God. And so if I'm profoundly hope that that continues to remain here. I don't really think short pants would stop that.
Is there anything at BK that we've stopped doing that you wish we would continue to do?
Well, I guess what I would say, I really do wish that there was a way that we could make the school more accessible to those who can't simply get here on their own. In other words, I think that busing system was a tremendously good thing for the school because it broadened the whole, it wasn't, I think in some ways we've become kind of a South Side Tulsa school, where in that camp it hit the entire city, and it had kids from all over the city, from every socioeconomic and every aspect there possibly could be. And I think that was good for the student body, to be exposed to each other in that manner. And I don't know enough about the student body at the present time to know if that's really happening. I know you just can't provide that service anymore.
And then is there anything that BK has stopped doing that you're glad they stopped?
Oh, I don't know. Probably if you have a little bit more freedom to be yourselves a little bit, that might be a better thing.
Yes.
Although it was an awful lot of fun to push the rule to the very edge. I don't know if it's as easy to do that now as it was then.
I do have one more question for you, Monsignor. Do you think you had an impact on Bishop Kelley? And if so, what do you think your biggest impact was?
Wow. I think I must have had some sort of an impact, because some of my best friends in life at the present time were students that were here at Bishop Kelley when I was here, and we became very good friends. One of the issues that really affected my time here was my first week, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but in 1971, just before school started, there was an automobile accident, and 3 of the juniors died. And so we began school on Thursday, and for the previous 3 Tuesdays, we had a funeral of one of those kids that was killed in that automobile accident. They were all juniors. And so when I came, I had all the junior religion classes. So I had those kids for the whole first semester. And I think that had a lot to do with that class bonding with me and me with them, because we went through a lot of grieving and dealing with all that together. So I think that had something to do with it. And so by virtue of that, a lot of those people are still very good friends of mine. So I would assume that there was some effect. Also, I think one of the things that I did here was liturgical. And we kind of began with, oh, how are you going to have 800 teenagers go to Mass in a gymnasium? How do we make that happen? And so for the first couple of years that I was here, we kind of experimented with that. How did it work the best? What could we do to make it work? Because when you've got 600 or 700 kids in a gymnasium where they're used to rooting and having glee clubs screaming and all that kind of stuff, then you come in and you say, oh, now we're going to have Mass. It's going to be very reverent. Well, that's expecting a lot, of anybody. And so it took us a while to get that down. And by the time I left, I was the 5th year, we could bring the entire school in, we could have Mass in the gym, and we could leave, and it was excellent decorum. I mean, it really was. But it took 2 or 3 years to get that really in place. We're not going to have funny business in here. So that was, hopefully, we taught them to pray a little bit in reference to that. I will remember one Mass, however, that was awesomely reverent and quiet. And that was a Mass that we had while Brother Bernardine, who was the superintendent of the school at that time, Brother Bernardine was having brain surgery. He had a tumor on the 8th nerve in here. And so while he was on the operating table, we had Mass in the gym. And it was awesome. The kids were wonderful. I mean, they just were totally here to pray for Brother Bernardine, which gave you at that time, he was kind of the staunch, I'm in charge, and everybody was scared to death of Brother Bernardine. But what you realized in that particular time was they also loved him profoundly. And so that was a great moment. It was one of the great remembrances of that time was the whole school awesomely quiet and reverent during Mass for Brother Bernardine. In this gymnasium right over here.
That's very cool. Are there any other, what other good fun stories, or what other great remembrances do you have from being here?
Oh gosh, just the whole interaction with the kids and things of that nature. I think I guess I should say too, that I think one of the great recent changes is that whole adjustment to having, I think that Father Brian O'Brien brought in that kind of a mindset that there was I think he changed a little bit the orientation of things, and I think that was a good thing. I think the presence of the priest when I was here was kind of like an assistant to the brothers. and that was a whole very different thing. Where now you have the sense that the diocese is in charge of the school very differently than you did when I was here. It was the Christian Brothers who were in charge of the school, or the Sisters of Divine Providence were in charge. Of course, remember in my day, the B wing was the girls and the A wing was the boys, and it was co-institutional. We began that's when that was right about the time they were beginning to have mixed classes. But originally, this school was, the boys and girls never had class together, ever. And so you had the boys in one wing and the girls in the other wing. And then this building was the science building. And the boys had it in the morning and the girls had it in the afternoon. But they were allowed to mix during lunch. The cafeteria was co-ed. But that was changing. When I came, that was in the process of changing. When I taught the juniors, they had all had separate classes in religion for freshman and sophomore year. And their junior year was the first year that we had mixed classes for religion. But they'd had their other classes mixed by then. But that still was a mindset that was very clear here. The brothers were in charge of the boys and the sisters were in charge of the girls.
Interesting. That's cool.
Yes, sir.
I heard you say you had religion with your kids starting out the first semester. Did block schedule not exist?
That we had. I don't think we had block scheduling. We had it was 6 weeks periods rather than 9 weeks. So like you had 6 weeks and then you had tests, and you had 6 weeks and then you had tests, and 6 weeks you had tests. But it was still, it was 7 periods a day or 6, something like that. Now, that's what it was. It was what, 6 periods of 55 minutes. Now, they did not have 5 minutes between classes. They had to get through it.
Interesting. So, were you the only priest on campus then? Lots of brothers and sisters, but
I was the only priest that was considered full-time.
okay.
There were 2 or 3 other priests who taught maybe 1 religion class. Like the juniors that I taught 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th hour. Father Skian taught 1st hour, and Father Sweat taught 5th hour. But that was just for the first year.
Okay.
And then once I was here, then I became the only priest that was teaching here.
Well, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It was nice to be here.